Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be going over my rest of season rankings for the 2023 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, I'll be covering all four primary positions, my top 36 running backs, top 45 wide receivers, and top 18 quarterbacks and tight ends. Additionally, besides giving you guys my representation as to how I think those positions are going to pan out for the remainder of the season, we'll be going over strength of schedule for the remainder of the season from weeks 5 through 17 in order to identify which positional players have the most advantageous matchups for the remainder of the season. You guys know how much of an influential impact the variable of matchups has over the course of a fantasy football season, whether it is within a singular week or whether it is from weeks 15 through 17, the fantasy football playoffs. We'll talk about all of that information on today's video, giving you guys an understanding as to how we can go ahead and prepare for the remainder of the season so that we could all capture a 2023 fantasy football championship. Before we get into that, a reminder for those of you guys who are trying to win yourself a 2023 fantasy football championship, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Again, we're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2023 season with that singular goal, helping you guys win every single Sunday. This upcoming Sunday, speaking of, I'll be live streaming here on the channel starting at 6 a.m. Pacific Standard Time prior to the London game between the Buffalo Bills and Jacksonville Jaguars. So for those of you guys who have questions this upcoming Sunday morning, be sure to swing on by this upcoming Sunday morning to get your questions answered. Now, for those of you who want your questions answered for the remainder of the 2023 season, be sure to travel down to the description and check out Underdog Fantasy. At this current moment in time, if you sign up using code Andrew and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only are you going to get a first-time deposit match up to $500, you're also going to get my rankings sent to you from my email personally to yours every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season. These rankings are by position, by tier, half PPR, full PPR, top 120 flex, all-encompassing rankings in order to help you guys out. By position even goes to kicker and defense. So for those of you who are interested, check out Underdog Fantasy today. At the end of today's video, I'll be putting together a resurrection best ball draft and also a couple pick'em slips for this upcoming weekend. So be sure to stick around for the end of the video as we'll be drafting some teams and putting these rest of season rankings to use. On top of that, also putting together some pick'em slips that we like going into week 5's overall matchups. For those of you who are wondering if you're eligible to take advantage of the opportunity on hand, be sure to check out the map to the right side of the screen. Draft responsibly via Underdog Fantasy, and thank you very much for the support. Okay, so let's start by talking about running back strength of schedule. It's relatively easy. I'll explain it here, and then for every single graphic that we bring up in terms of strength of schedule, you'll begin to understand it. The number one ranked team, the Kansas City Chiefs, at the running back position for weeks 5 through 17 have the most advantageous matchups going forward. In terms of how many fantasy points are allowed to opposing running backs, in terms of rushing statistics alone thus far this season from weeks 1 through 5, again, I've already encompassed the week 5 Thursday night football game between the Chicago Bears and Washington Commanders in this overall statistics, so that is taken into account. But if you go ahead and look at the averages in terms of fantasy points allowed by opposing defenses for the remainder of the season, the Kansas City Chiefs on average are taking on defenses that are allowing 15 plus fantasy points to opposing running backs in terms of rushing statistics alone, which are rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. While on the other end of the spectrum, the Seattle Seahawks, they have the most difficult matchup at the running back position, but the separation between those two is just about 5.25 fantasy points, which again is a huge difference, is a touchdown plus, but nonetheless, this isn't a powerful enough variable in fantasy football to isolated force me away from getting guys like Kenneth Walker, Christian McCaffrey, and Jonathan Taylor on my team, despite the fact that those three teams and their running backs have the most difficult strength of schedules going forward. Now, when we go ahead and isolate just the final 3 weeks of the fantasy football season, weeks 15 through 17, we find the following. The Los Angeles Chargers have the easiest strength of schedule, followed by the Atlanta Falcons, Philadelphia Eagles, New England Patriots, and the Tennessee Titans. While on the other end of the spectrum, we have the Seahawks, Miami Dolphins, Arizona Cardinals, Giants, and Houston Texans, who will certainly be struggling throughout the fantasy football playoffs as they take on really good run-stopping forces throughout those 3 games. Nonetheless, now that we've covered that, let's go ahead and let's talk about my top 36 running back rankings by tier for the remainder of the 2023 season, for the rest of the 2023 season. As of right now, this is for a half PPR scoring format, meeting everyone in the middle, whether you do play in a standard league or a full PPR league. I would talk about every single one of these running backs individually, but there's 117 players on today's video. So we're just going to go ahead, give you guys the visual representation as to how I rank these players. Hopefully this can help you out for upcoming trades, upcoming decisions that you'll have to make for the remainder of the season, and get you guys some priority as to which running backs that you should be going after and which running backs I specifically am prioritizing over one another for the remainder of the season. So with this all covered, again, rankings are always subject to change. There are going to be injuries. There are going to be circumstances that pop up, which certainly will adjust these rankings every single week, but just wanted to go ahead and represent this going forward so that you guys understand how I look at the running back position, how I'm expecting it to pan out for the remainder of the season. Let's move on to the wide receiver position in regards to strength of schedule. Just like the running back position, the Kansas City Chiefs are at the number 1 spot. They have the easiest strength of schedule at the wide receiver position in terms of wide receiver receiving statistics isolated. Again, this is how many points defenses thus far this season on average have allowed to opposing wide receivers. Again, even though the Kansas City Chiefs have the easiest strength of schedule going forward, there isn't that big of a difference between them and the Philadelphia Eagles, which are ranked last. Again, it's about a 5-point difference, but in the grand scheme of things, this is not going to influence me away from getting guys like A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Keenan Allen, of course, guys from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers ranked at 31 here, like Chris Godwin or Mike Evans onto my roster via trade or keeping them for the remainder of the season. Now, when we talk about the fantasy football playoffs, when we go ahead and isolate weeks 15, 16, and 17, it's apparent when you compare the Seattle Seahawks to the Chicago Bears, that there is a huge difference in terms of the strength of schedule and the fantasy points allowed by those defenses. 16 plus fantasy points separate those two. Therefore, of course, we want to go ahead and get guys like DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett on our teams for those overall matchups for the fantasy football playoffs. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, if in fact Joe Burrow is even going to be active and healthy by the time we get there, we can pray to the fantasy gods. But either way, just wanted to go ahead and represent these statistics. You guys can run away with them and of course continue to analyze them by clicking the pause button and checking them out for yourselves, depending on who you guys have on roster. But either way, let's go ahead and present my top 45 wide receiver rankings. I tried to fit in as many wide receivers as I could, but either way, there's a lot of players here. Cooper Kupp, again, is at the top of this conversation. My assumption is that he's going to be healthy. And if he's healthy and at a full capacity, of course he's going to ball out. Now, there are other players like a DJ Moore that has obviously moved up in my overall rankings. Puka Nacua, prior to the season beginning, was never even in this conversation, but the influence of Cooper Kupp being here obviously plays a huge role within his overall upside going forward. Nico Collins has played incredibly well thus far this season and hopefully will continue to do so for that Houston Texans offense. Either way, just going ahead, presenting these overall players rankings by tier. You may not agree with them, but nonetheless, hopefully this helps you kind of narrow down which players that we should be going after for the remainder of the season, trying to get on roster in order to improve our chances of winning a fantasy football championship in 2023. Moving on, let's talk about the tight end position. Strength of schedule. As you guys can see, the Minnesota Vikings, TJ Hawkinson, has the easiest strength of schedule for the remainder of the season, weeks 5 through 17, while on the other end of the spectrum, the Jacksonville Jaguars, Evan Ingram, has the most difficult strength of schedule. Obviously, like I've mentioned in the past, this isn't a huge difference maker. We're going to continue to roster Evan Ingram, and we're going to continue to play him because he's playing incredibly well. 8+ targets in each of the last 3 weeks. If opportunity is there, I don't care what matchup you're going up against, talent is going to be able to prevail with a high volume of opportunity. Now, when we go ahead and isolate weeks 15, 16, and 17, the fantasy football playoffs, we find that the Cleveland Browns, Minnesota Vikings, Carolina Panthers, Washington Commanders have the easiest strength of schedules at the position. Of course, in some of these scenarios, like a TJ Hawkinson, once again, that bodes very well for us. But David Njoku in the Cleveland Browns hasn't really played well. Hayden Hurst in the Carolina Panthers hasn't really played well. Logan Thomas had himself an incredible game on Thursday night. That's the best performance he's had in years, I'd say since 2020. But hopefully he can continue that momentum for the remainder of the season all the way until the fantasy football playoffs for the tight end position. But nonetheless, on the other end of the spectrum, we have guys like Evan Ingram, George Kittle, who are going to have very difficult matchups throughout the fantasy football playoffs. But again, it's not steering me away from them for the remainder of the season, especially when we get into those conversations, because we know that they're going to get the opportunity and they have the talent to deliver. All right, let's go ahead and let's represent my top 18 tight end rankings for the remainder of the season. Of course, Travis Kelce isolated at the very top, followed by a bunch of other tight ends that are very inconsistent to say the least. Again, even though George Kittle and Darren Waller have been highly inconsistent thus far this season, I give them the benefit of the doubt that eventually they're going to find success. George Kittle, in every single season that he has been healthy, has always been a top 4 tight end in fantasy football. Therefore, I am putting my trust in George Kittle. And for the remainder of the season, I'm expecting a lot of upside and a lot of potential touchdowns that hopefully Brock Purdy will be throwing in his direction. Now, speaking of Brock Purdy, let's get into the conversation regarding quarterbacks. In terms of rest of season strength of schedule, weeks 5 through 17, we found the following. The Kansas City Chiefs, for the third time today, have the easiest strength of schedule, not only at the running back, but also at the wide receiver and now the quarterback position. I mean, Patrick Mahomes should have himself an incredible rest of season. And if he doesn't finish as the number 1 overall quarterback, I will be surprised. But I don't even have him ranked as my number 1 overall quarterback. Besides the fact, either way, the expectation is that the Kansas City Chiefs have the easiest strength of schedule, while the Jacksonville Jaguars have the most difficult strength of schedule. It's not steering me away from guys like Trevor Lawrence or Jalen Hurts, who has the second most difficult strength of schedule at the position. But I just wanted to go ahead and represent these. If in fact this variable is something that you guys like to utilize, you can go ahead and do so for the remainder of the season. But when we go ahead and isolate weeks 15 through 17, we find that going into the fantasy football playoffs, where championships are earned and won, perhaps perhaps Kyler Murray's not a bad idea. The Arizona Cardinals have the easiest strength of schedule throughout those 3 weeks. I mean, if in fact he's available, maybe you want to stash him on your injured reserve. Maybe there's a possibility that he returns, and when he does, he'll have enough time to be able to build enough experience, comfortability within that knee, and then by all means, perhaps even capture a fantasy football championship for you, considering, of course, the ability through the air, his ability with his legs, and on top of it, how well the Arizona Cardinals as an offense have already been producing thus far this season. Nonetheless, just wanted to go ahead and represent this. We'll go ahead and transition to our top 18 quarterback rankings. My top 5 quarterbacks are identical from the beginning of the season. I still have Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, and Justin Fields as my top 5. Number 6 used to be Joe Burrow, but again, we've moved him down to number 10 because, again, I don't know when he's going to get healthy. He is providing more and more kind of confidence with us, saying that he's the healthiest he's been in the last couple weeks, and he's, of course, continuing to get more progress, get more PT, physical therapy on his calf, and eventually he'll be at 100%. But until then, it'll be followed by, guys like Justin Herbert, which again was my number 7 prior to the season beginning. Anthony Richardson, who has been unbelievable, has had himself a minimum of 1 rushing touchdown in every single game he has participated in this season. Tua Tagovailoa, Kirk Cousins playing extremely well. So is Jordan Love. So is Brock Purdy. So is CJ Stroud. But we also have guys like Trevor Lawrence, who I anticipate is going to get better over time. Dak Prescott, that has had 2 games thus far this season in which they blew out the opposing team, whether it was the New York Giants or the New England Patriots. In those games, didn't really get a fair shake of upside in terms of fantasy points. But going forward, will have himself an advantageous strength of schedule, and hopefully he's going to have himself some upside weeks in order to help our fantasy lineups. Now that covers my rest of season rankings for all 4 primary positions. Now what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to head on over to Underdog Fantasy, put together some pick'em slips, and of course, take advantage of the Resurrection Best Ball Leagues. Again, for those of you guys who have drafted teams, they have not panned out well, why not go ahead and resurrect your season by going ahead, heading on over to Underdog Fantasy and drafting some Resurrection Best Ball Leagues. You can draft the players you missed in your August draft. You can avoid the players that have killed your fantasy teams, and you can build a Resurrection team going forward for the remainder of the season in order to win some prizes via Underdog Fantasy. Let's go ahead and let's check that out right now. So as you guys can see to the left side of the screen, we have the Best Ball Resurrection Draft. 18 rounds, 12 teams, half PPR scoring format, and you never have to set your lineups. Never have to make a mistake on a weekly basis. All you're trying to do is build the best overall roster, and your best players every single week will automatically start for you. So whether it is, employing a strategy potentially of drafting 3 tight ends and trying to get the best overall week in terms of accuracy by volume, instead of going after a stud like a Mark Andrews or a TJ Hawkinson with high overall draft capital. You can go ahead and draft 3 guys like a Dalton Kincaid, Logan Thomas, and perhaps even Tyler Higbee, and just hope that they can find the end zone and be just as relevant, because you are going ahead and starting 3 tight ends, and the best every single week is going to be your starter by the end of it. Either way, you can employ different strategies like this. This upcoming Best Ball Resurrection League, it begins in week 6. So be sure to go ahead. You have less than 1 week to go ahead and get some drafts under your belt. As of right now, build an overall roster and win some incredible prizes via Underdog Fantasy. I'm going to go ahead and present to you guys one of the drafts I conducted for this overall Best Ball Resurrection format. Now, as you guys can see to the left side of the screen, we have the Best Ball Resurrection draft that I conducted. A couple of the names that were really surprises for me, besides the fact that DJ Moore went number 9 overall, Keenan Allen 11, Travis Kelce went 12. Again, if you guys remember back in August, Keenan Allen was a 3rd round pick. At the middle of the 1st round, Travis Kelce was consistently being taken because we knew the positional advantage that he had amongst all other tight ends. But thus far this season, he has not been able to, kind of act upon that opportunity of being the best overall tight end thus far this season, because again, he missed week 1, and in his last 3 performances hasn't been better than someone like Mark Andrews. Therefore, again, there's a lot of shifts in comparison to what we anticipated in the offseason and what's the true reality of fantasy football thus far in 2023. Now, there are other names like a Kenneth Walker that obviously wasn't drafted very highly this offseason in comparison to where he's going now. In regards to where I have him ranked, where he's ranked here, he's coming off the board as the number 5 overall running back. And this entire offseason, we were worried about, is a guy like Zach Charbonnet, drafted in the 2nd round, going to make an immediate impact? And that has not been the case. So, of course, he has incredible upside within that offense. But Devon Achane, a 2nd round selection. There are a lot of players that were not in this conversation in August, but now are in the conversation. Sam Laporta, Kyren Williams, players that really have stepped up their game overall and are going to continue to be impact players for the remainder of the season. Now, you can go ahead and draft these teams any which way you want, whether it is, like I mentioned, drafting, volume by accuracy, 3 quarterbacks to go ahead and hope that one of the 3 have themselves an upside week within a given week, or draft 3 tight ends in order to go for the same thing. Or you can do as I did. I went after the Mark Andrews and Lamar Jackson stack. That Baltimore Ravens offense has looked incredible thus far this season, and I just wanted to go ahead and stack them in this overall option. But either way, go ahead and take advantage of the opportunity to resurrect your season with the Resurrection Best Ball Draft via Underdog Fantasy today. Be sure to use code Andrew to sign up, make that first-time deposit, because when you do, that first-time deposit match is up to $500. That offer won't be here for long, so be sure to take advantage of the opportunity. Also getting my rankings, all that kind of jazz. Outside of that, let's go ahead and put together some pick'em slips and close out today's video. So as you guys can see to the left side of the screen, I've already gone ahead and put together a pick'em slip of sorts. I really do not understand why Chris Olave is currently at 4.5 receptions. Whether it is Derek Carr or Jameis Winston, I understand that last week was an absolute fluke of a game. Not only that, the secondary of the New England Patriots are all injured. Christian Gonzalez, Jonathan Jones, Jack Jones, Marcus Jones. There are so many players that are injured within that secondary. I'm anticipating a lot of upside, and out of a bare minimum, 5 receptions for someone like Chris Olave. I'm going back to the well for Jalen Waddle for another consecutive week. I've mentioned it in the past, 12 of the last 15 games that Jalen Waddle has played with a healthy Tua Tagovailoa, he's been able to surpass 65 receiving yards. I'm going back to that well. I'm expecting him to have himself a great performance against the New York Giants. We're going to Cooper Kupp. He should be active, ready to go. 60.5 receiving yards is a walk in the park. I take him in terms of all of the overall numbers that he has presented via Underdog Fantasy, and I will go over that in just a moment. But again, 60.5 receiving yards is a walk in the park for a guy like Cooper Kupp and how well he has played in the past with Matthew Stafford in the combination that they have put forth over the course of the last couple seasons. And the final player is Jake Elliott. Jake Elliott has been unbelievable. Just looking at how well he's played in terms of the kicking game. 4 field goals made, 3 field goals made, 2 field goals made. The fact of the matter is they're in an indoor stadium in LA, taking on a team in which, again, they've played well defensively. They're going to force field goals because this Eagles offense isn't as high-flying as they were last season. They find some struggles here and there. They're not going to be able to score in terms of touchdowns every time down, and they have one of the best kickers in the National Football League. We're going higher on all 4 of these statistics to go ahead and start the week and put together a pick'em slip. You can go ahead and insure these pick'em slips technically if you want. The insurance policy goes ahead and gives you an opportunity to where even though the overall payout isn't as high with the insurance, if you get all 4 correct, if you get 3 out of the 4 correct, you still bode pretty well within the given week. Now, like I mentioned just moments ago with Cooper Kupp, again, all these numbers are very much so attainable. I think touchdowns is, obviously more difficult, but considering the matchup, how many fantasy points the Eagles have allowed to opposing wide receivers thus far this season, the fact that Cooper Kupp has on multiple occasions already this week full practice, and Sean McVay said he's not going to be limited in any sort of capacity, the expectation is a lot of points. Therefore, I'm going higher on this. In terms of all the other plays, I honestly, truly do believe that Jake Elliott, 1.5 field goals made is an automatic. He's done it in all 4 games thus far this season. I'm anticipating, because it's a controlled weather environment, for him to once again accomplish this. I'm so confident in this. I'm going with $100 and going for 300. I am so confident in this overall play. I'm willing to go ahead, confirm it, send it. We're hoping for the best. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's content in regards to rest of season rankings, strength of schedule, and of course the Resurrection Best Ball League, and of course a couple of pick'em slips. I'll be live streaming Sunday morning starting at 6 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, so be sure to swing on by. If you guys have not yet already subscribed to the channel, be sure to do so. Also use code Andrew via Underdog Fantasy to take advantage, whether you're following, whether you're fading some of the overall plays that I'm making this upcoming weekend. Again, you can go ahead and even put together a pick'em slip for the 100K play Mark Andrews to potentially win yourself $10,000 this upcoming weekend via Underdog Fantasy. There are a boatload, a literal boatload of overall pick'ems that you can get in the NFL, but it doesn't even end there. There's college football. My goodness, there's Major League Baseball, which again is in the playoffs as we currently speak. There are definitely a lot. So go ahead, take advantage of the opportunity today. And until next time, thank you everybody for watching, and I'll see you guys. Peace.